we wanted to start with why we're doing this, and I wanted to ask Board Chair Griego to say a couple words to launch this.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to bring some clarity to the purpose of our discussion today. This is an opportunity for all of us to be able to understand the blueprint better. I will talk to staff after we completed 3 of the committee presentations this week and next week to determine what additional information may be needed for our May board meeting and our June committee meetings. Staff is also videotaping the presentation today so that we can share this with any members that are not here today. And also you can link in it to review it and as well as share it with your staff. So I'm going to hand this back over to Mike.
So I'm going to attempt to take you in flying style through basically 15 years worth of work at a little bit more than a minute a year. Wish me luck. You'll see this chart a few times through the show. The MTP on the far left was before my time here, but has been characterized as the last of the sort of the old style MTPs, which was more about taking individual transportation plans and compiling them in a book and putting a title of regional plan on it and moving forward. One of the effects of that plan was that it immediately drew a lawsuit, which was settled. But I think that sort of shook the organization, and that plus some not very good performance predictions on how that plan would actually deliver benefits to the people in the region led to quickly and immediately starting the next MTP, which is this second one. And that was characterized by about a 50-person transportation roundtable that really brought in a lot more stakeholders than had been at the table in the past. And one of the storylines of this presentation is that transportation and land use are, in the real world, sort of two sides of the same coin. They're inextricably linked. But this MTP was the last of the MTPs that exclusively looked at the transportation side of that coin. It took a sort of a base case business as usual projection on land use and assumed that that was fixed, tried to design a transportation system to serve that land use that would work. And the plan had a number of innovations in it when it was adopted, including the community design program. But because it only manipulated, if you will, the transportation side of the equation, which is how much should we spend on transit, how much should we spend on roads, et cetera. It also was a fairly low performing plan in its projected performance. Congestion in particular was projected to go up on a per capita basis. Air emissions were projected to go up on a per capita basis. And as I'm told, about when that plan was adopted, there was a movement within the board to start a serious look at the land use side of the equation. I am told there was a discussion at the Cap to Cap trip that year amongst the public and private leaders in the region about the need to finally look seriously at land use patterns on a regional scale. And that led to the start of the what came to be called the blueprint. It was not initially labeled the blueprint. It initially had a much sexier name, the Transportation Land Use Study, with a tagline, better data for local decision making. This happened at a point in time of great controversy in the region. It was the AB 680 era of the bill in the Assembly, and there was a lot of turmoil around the SACOG board. And so this project started very carefully. And one of the ideas that came from one of our members, in this case it was the city of Roseville and one of their assistant city managers, Patty Dunn, was to address some of the concerns that were out and about by adopting a set of principles, which the board did, and I don't need to read these to you, but you will see some common themes that were very much in play at that time as we're having in our current discussion. So these were sort of a part of the marching orders that the board gave to the staff as we led your project. So there were three real basic organizing principles to the way the board designed what later became called the Blueprint. One is that it was supposed to be about implementation, not just a feel-good visioning process in a study. Second, that it really needed to focus on facts, that it wasn't supposed to be a religious or a theological debate, it was supposed to be a facts-based process. And third, that it really needed to be aggressive on the citizen democracy front and get out and involve lots of stakeholders. We got a great partnership with Valley Vision, who really plowed new ground in this region about getting more and more people to the table. We went through a rigorous set of steps in a 3-year process, starting with a forecast of how much growth would occur in the region over 50 years, doing a base case land use projection of what that would look like if current trends continued. Then we went to every single jurisdiction and held a workshop about infill opportunities and greenfield opportunities. We did multiple workshops in our two largest jurisdictions, Sac County and Sac City. We set up a planners committee for the first time. The board set it up, I should say, had a formal charge adopted by the board as to what the planners committee was to do. They worked with the SACOG staff on all of this. And then we had a big regional scale forum to look at alternatives to the base case, an elected officials forum where every single local elected official was invited, not just SACOG board members, but full city council, SACOG board members. And then we went and did briefings with every single local government legislative body in the region on what the draft proposal was and what it specifically meant to their city or county. That led to an unanimous adoption of the blueprint and an implementation strategy for it. Some of the key lessons that we learned through this is that growth is driven by employment growth. A lot of people think when they see a new subdivision, in particular a new shopping center, that's causing growth. That's not true. Growth is driven by employment growth, and if we are lucky enough to have a growing economy sometime again, that, by the way, is a dynamic of us competing with the state and the state competing with the nation for market share, for the economic growth driver. After that, you have population and housing, which responds to that employment growth, provides shelter for workers, meets basic human needs, daily human needs. And then the final step is to look at the demographics, particularly age and ethnicity, because those drive what kinds of housing are going to be needed for those workers and retirees to serve their needs. So important that we not forget that the blueprint was about how best to accommodate that growth forecast. We did not have a debate about the merits of whether fast growth is good or slow growth is good. It was always intended to be a growth management discussion. We use the term test drive smart growth principles. We weren't trying to assume that they were inherently good at the outset. We tried to put them out in place so people could decide whether they liked them or not. For more detailed discussion later, an important caveat is that the Department of Finance also plays in this growth forecast game. And so we're not doing that unilaterally. I'm not going to go deep on that now, but I don't want you to be unaware of that. It is of interest that the current Department of Finance forecast for the mid-century point is virtually identical to what the blueprint forecast was that drove that project. So we immediately started building data and analytical tools that we did not have so that we could drive a fact-based process. The base case, the first of these three maps that are coming were created by the Urban Land Institute a couple of years before the birth of the blueprint. The yellow is the urbanized area in this region at the turn of the prior century. That's the growth through the midpoint of the prior century. That was the urbanization pattern approximately when the blueprint started. And then in the base case trend scenario, that would be the urban footprint if we followed that. All of the data that came with that pretty much horrified people, no matter where we went. There was There were huge increases projected for congestion and emissions, a very limited set of housing choices, a very limited set of transportation choices, and lots of land consumption, which was a threat to farmland, open space, and natural resources. So as I said, we took what at the time in the country had sort of come to be known as smart growth principles and went into workshops and asked people what they thought of these ideas as a different way of managing growth than the way the base case projected growth would occur. We started at the neighborhood scale because we wanted people to understand what it was. Instead of an ethereal regional map in 2050, the intent was to drive it right down to the neighborhood scale so that people would understand it. The first of these workshops was in Citrus Heights. As I say, these were all over the region. I don't have a slide for the county workshops. This was the big regional forum at the convention center in the spring of 2004, where people voted on which of scenarios A, B, C, and D they liked best for the region. This is a snapshot from the elected officials summit that was held at the library in downtown Sacramento. Again, there were clickers and people were voting on what they liked and disliked about the draft plan. This is a slightly more complicated map of what the urban footprint would have been under the base case. That's what it ends up being under the plan that the board adopted. That's more than 300 square miles less land for urbanization than in the base case. Most of that change in less land consumption relates to the housing stock. We learned through our demographic projection that 2/3 of the growth of housing would be people 55 years and older. The funds were raised from the Metro Chamber of Commerce, the Building Industry Association, North State DIA, and the Urban Land Institute to hire Robert Charles Lesser to do a market survey. For the older people in the region at the time, what it said was 2/3 of them preferred a product that was hard to find in the market at the time, which is either a small lot, single family, or an attached for sale or for rent product. That told us that the future housing need was likely going to be different than the past housing need. Numerous studies since that time have agreed with that conclusion, including the 2010 census that not just talks about the elderly, but talks about that the young people also are wanting mixed-use neighborhoods, basically similar sorts of housing options to what not all, but many retirees are saying they want. There was even a study out last year, sponsored by the Urban Land Institute, that concluded that there's enough conventional large lot single family in the state, really, to service the future needs today. Now, the plan that you've adopted does not go that far, but that kind of thinking is out and about. Here's a numerical way to look at this housing number. In the base case scenario, 80% of future housing growth following trends would have been large lot or rural residential. Those next years show you how the market actually responded. These are both market influences and public policy influences. And at the bottom, you see what the blueprint projects through the year 2050 for the growth is that almost 70% of it would be in the small lot and attached product. Now, this chart is really important to focus on because you all have heard the criticisms that the blueprint is all about stack them and pack them, and everybody has to live above coffee shop, and it ain't true. The top bar is the split in the region in 2002 between that conventional product and some of the other, and the bottom one is what that split would be in 2050 if the blueprint was built. And so you still have nearly half of all the product in the region in the more conventional product. That's about housing choice, adding housing choice to the marketplace, not restricting people's choices. These are just a few pictures of projects that were built between the start of the blueprint or after the start of the blueprint. It's a lot of this 2-3 story product that basically had not been built in this region in a very long time. Another key principle is the mixing of houses and jobs. We have 3 major job centers in the region. We all know there are many important secondary ones, but the downtowns of Sacramento and West Sacramento, Roseville, Rockland, and Rancho Cordova are the 3 biggest ones. And so the goal of the blueprint is to add a lot more housing around those 3 employment centers to shorten trips and give people options of how to get to and from work. It's happening. You see this happening around the Roseville area, around the downtown area in Sacramento, and in Rancho Cordova. It's obviously not happened a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, but in the run-up to that, there was a lot of this new style product meeting the market test in this region. Before the board adopted the blueprint, they hired Richard Worthland to do a public opinion poll. Most of you will remember he was Ronald Reagan's pollster, both as governor and as president. I'm giving you just a very short snippet of his findings. Now realize this was 2004, a lot more growth going on than today. But at the time, when you asked people whether they thought growth was going to help or hurt their quality of life, most people said it was going to damage their quality of life. Through the survey, Richard Worthland tested these different, what later came to be known as blueprint principles, and asked people whether they liked or disliked them, both today and when they would be retired. This shows that every single one of those principles tested in the positive with people, both at the age that they're in now and what they projected their attitudes would be, or their needs would be rather, when they were retired. And then at the end of the survey, he asked them, if you believe that growth was going to be managed according to those principles, then would you think it helps your quality of life or hurts it? And the results completely reversed. They went from a 2-to-1 negative to a 2-to-1 positive. He stood at that elected officials forum and said he'd been asking these kind of questions at the beginning and end of polls for a long time, and he'd never seen such a dramatic reversal in people's attitudes in his polling. I'm pretty sure he used the word stunned when he saw these numbers. And he advised the elected officials that they should pay very careful attention to this finding because it was an unusual one in his history. This is a list of many of the organizations that in one way or another supported the blueprint process as it was going on. This is a list of the awards to the board that started to flow in, many of them even before the blueprint was adopted. The reason those awards came in was not because you had a better regional smart growth plan than Portland or Salt Lake City or the others. It was because of that. It was because people were really surprised at the breadth and the depth of the involvement and the support, and the fact that the business community, the environmental community, and everybody from Live Oak to downtown Sacramento around this table and points in between supported it. It was the breadth of the support that got the attention of literally the country when your board adopted the blueprint. So now I want to go to the, after the blueprint was adopted, the next plan, the one in the middle here, is the first MTP to happen post the adoption of the blueprint. And I'm just showing you one slide on this because the one metric that, a lot of other metrics change, but this is the one that tells the story the quickest, is the vehicle miles traveled per capita, which just means people are driving, how much they drive, had been growing in the out years in the prior plans. And in the first plan that was adopted after the board adopted the blueprint, that number starts to go down. That means that air emissions go down too. It means that congestion starts to get tamed. And so this demonstrates how when you put land use planning and transportation planning together, you can finally start to get the performance that you want. When you're only dealing with one of those two variables at a time, you cannot get that kind of performance benefit. So right after that plan was adopted, quick aside, in the middle of that plan, this SIP happened, and that's a boring term for an air quality plan. And I'm hoping to come back either at the May board meeting or in June with much more depth on this because it's a really critical component. But for now, let me just say this. This region is out of attainment for two critical pollutants that are regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. One is ozone precursors, which are reactive organic gases, ROG, and NOx, nitrous oxide. The second is for particulate matter 2.5. We had the benefit of being able to use the performance benefits of the blueprint to help establish that we would meet our conformity targets for those two pollutants going forward. Today we're in a situation where actually for the ozone precursors we have a little bit of wiggle room, which accrues to the benefit of the business community, because we're creating space on the transportation side which we can give to the business community to use. On the PM 2.5 side, we have no wiggle room at all. We are right on the bleeding edge of what we're required to do. And we will give you more depth in a subsequent briefing, but for now, let me just say that if we fail a conformity test, something happens to our transportation funding. It gets delayed, it gets diminished, it gets cut off. It depends on how the exact circumstances. But there is an absolute nexus between meeting our conformity requirements and keeping a steady flow of transportation funds in this region. That's an unconditional statement. So right as this plan was being adopted, the state of California passed Senate Bill 375. Its key components were that the Air Resources Board sets targets for passenger vehicle emissions for global warming gases for every region for those 2 years. We are required to meet those targets if it's feasible. If we conclude it's not, we have an out into an alternative planning strategy. That would not be without political and potential legal consequences, but the law is set up to provide a way out if it's impractical. The MTP must have an SCS that has much greater emphasis on land use than our prior plans. Transportation investments must be consistent with the projected land use pattern in the MTP. There were CEQA streamlining benefits to incentivize land use that is in that SCS. And affordable housing, which we're also not going to go deep on today, but a provision is added that the RENA statute, as we implement it here with you, must be consistent with that SCS that you now adopt and re-adopt every 4 years. So to the issue of the season, there is express language in the state law to protect your local land use authority. We at your direction were an important part of getting that language into the statute. It's in multiple places, I'm just showing you one. And then in the first MTP that you adopted after that new law, you put language to expressly make clear that local land use authority is protected in the execution of that plan. So those words which you see at the outset of the blueprint, clear up to present day, are prominent throughout this consistently prominent throughout the entire process. I'm about done here. The plan that was adopted by this board last April was really focused on a slower growth and less revenue and having to do more with less. It was about pencil sharpening, getting better. And so one of the things you'll see is more prominence of the fix-it-first mindset. The budget that was adopted, the largest slice of the pie, goes to maintenance and rehabilitation of the current system. Very recent polling in the state of California and the county of Sacramento affirms that people are really focused on this issue of maintaining the current system, for the moment anyway, rather than investing in new capacity. So the polls are very consistently showing that. We organized the way the land use piece is described a little bit differently in this plan and used this community type framework. You're familiar with this and you can read those titles. It turns into this kind of a map, which is a purposely fuzzy map. You don't need to take your glasses off. It's fuzzy because we're trying to make clear it's not intended to be mistaken for a regional general plan map or a regional zoning code map. It's a conceptual framework map. But the amount of growth that goes into each of those 4 basic community types matters a lot. And so on the housing side, about 30% is projected to go into centers and corridors, which is more classic infill. About 25% into established neighborhoods. The largest single portion, 42%, into developing communities. These are new green fields on the edge of the area, and a small amount in rural residential. Staying roughly within that balance is really critical to maintaining the performance of the plan. It matters a lot. And you'll see why in a minute. These are the vehicle miles traveled numbers for each of those 4 community types. So they are, not surprisingly, the lowest in the centers and corridors, both today and in 2020 and 2035. A little bit higher in the established communities, and higher yet in the developing communities and the rural residential. So that regional average line you see going through there, you can see just sort of graphically how maintaining that balance keeps that regional average where it needs to be for high performance. This is just looking at it a little bit different way, which is mode share. How many non-auto trips happen within each of those 4 typologies? You can see what the message is there as well. One of the really good news stories about your most recent plan is on the transit side. We have had trouble figuring out how to make the transit system work and making it cost effective. This is the first plan in the whole 15 years that we finally have a plan. I can just say from the staff side, I can look you in the eye and say, if we can implement this plan, we can make the transit system work. And a couple of things happen by expanding the current system, and it's largely bus expansion, by the way. There's rail expansion, but most of this is about a better bus service. Not only do new homes get access to high quality transit, but a lot of existing homes that are in the ground today get access to, finally, to high quality transit service. And the same thing happens with jobs. I'll give you some economic numbers on that in just a second. The amount of reduced impact on farmlands, in particular, from the way we were growing when the blueprint started and the way we're projected to grow now, is almost of order of magnitude difference. If you remember nothing else, remember this slide. In the 2002 MTP, per capita heavy congestion was projected to grow by nearly 60%. That's that top dashed line. In 2008, which was the first plan done that included the blueprint, the rate of growth flattened out, but it was still growing. In the plan you just adopted, which is really a man bites dog story, because this just doesn't happen. The story is that congestion per capita is projected to decline in the future. That's a big story. One of the reasons that happens is what people often think of as small shifts onto transit produce benefits for auto commuters. Every 1% increase in the percentage of transit riders who are taking transit for commute purposes leads to a 5% improvement in overall regional congestion. It's a good example of how this system is very finely tuned and balanced, and all of the parts fit together. It's not about one person winning and losing, it's about everybody working together so everybody can participate in realizing the benefits. We also meet the targets set for us under Senate Bill 375. We have a little bit of flexibility at 2020. We have no flexibility at all at 2035. It's just like PM 2.5 under the Clean Air Act. And happily, we can argue that we're on a trajectory to meet the governor. There's 2 governor's executive orders now, one Schwarzenegger and one Brown, requiring very strict performance on greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And our plan does not go that far, but we have been able to show that we're on a trajectory to be consistent with those executive orders. So in close, here's a way to think about the benefits of the integrated planning that the blueprint and the MTP, SCS give to you. First and foremost is that they achieve the benefits that the people in the region have said they have wanted. for all of the polling and the workshops and everything we've done, it's a homegrown deal designed to meet local needs. There are other benefits, however. One is on the regulatory side. It's a defensive shield. Your voluntary decision to do this together has given you a defensive shield against regulatory attempts that would have actually degraded your local land use authority. One of the most obvious, I talked briefly about at the last board meeting, was the water bill. That was, 4 years ago at this point, a draft of which expressly took in the secondary zone land use authority from the local level to the state level. We were able to go to the state and argue that because of the blueprint and the SCS that was going to be consistent with this new state law, that authority should retain at the local level, and that was added to the statute. It did a completely 180-degree turn as a result of that argument that we were able to make on your behalf. We also have used the high-performing blueprint and MTP SCS to jawbone with federal agencies over providing flexibility as they implement the Clean Water Act and the Natural Resource, the Endangered Species Act, and FEMA and the Council of Environmental Quality as they look at enhanced regulations within floodplains, that they need to honor this local land use strategy that you have adopted. And those agencies like that strategy. I think some of you heard some of that on the most recent CAP trip. It has credibility. It has oomph. I've been criticized for using the phrase political capital, but I'm going to use it again. It has political capital that delivers benefits. It has, and I think will continue to deliver benefits. And as I've already said, we've been able to get CEQA streamlining. We're actively working to get more CEQA streamlining. I'm not enormously optimistic it's going to be huge in this session, but we're working on it. These are coming in funny. Let me bring them all in. So on the funding side, we're also trying to use this at your direction to restore some of the funding that has been taken away. So Senate Bill 1, which is in a way, a reestablishment of redevelopment, is based on giving money to projects that would implement this SCS. The cap and trade legislation that has been supported by the League of Cities, the Association of Counties, the California Alliance for Jobs, and other regions around the state would basically give to you cap and trade funds to help you implement your SCS. That's the policy nexus. And the federal, on the federal level, MAP 21, the most recent transportation bill, moves in the direction of performance-based funding. It's a small step, but it's clear what the trajectory is. It's my belief that the next bill will take an even further step in that direction. And so it is my opinion that winning more money for this region is contingent on continuing to have high performance plans that you can advocate with the state and the federal levels. Now on the transit side, those earlier numbers I showed you, one of the things they translate to is a rapid uptick in the amount of the transit system that's paid for at the ticket fare box rather than through some state, federal, or local funding source. That generates more money that can be plowed back in, not just the transit system, but to the complete street projects and the bicycle lanes and the things that are necessary to make all that work. All that's factored into your plan and is one of the reasons why it shows such high performance. Something we don't talk about a lot, but the development community I know is interested in, and you are, is that it just costs less to serve that style development. Spread out development costs more money. And so we estimated when the blueprint was adopted that it was about a $15 billion less costly infrastructure system, all told, not just transportation, but water, sewer, stormwater, et cetera. There's also a lower water demand in a more compact footprint, which obviously relates to the water issues that we're so concerned about. And so the storyline there is that while we're focused on transportation, that's our core, the land use pattern absolutely drives the transportation performance, and there are some other benefits that come along with it when you get the transportation and land use nexus right that deliver other benefits, such as lower infrastructure costs, and we didn't even think of when the whole process started. So